Okay, hi, my name's Guy, and this is my testimony. I'm going to tell you today how I went from being a down-and-out drug addict to becoming a God-fearing man. So it all kind of started when I was about 12 years old, and I smoked my first joint. And it was an eye-opening experience for me, to say the least. It opened up a world of what I thought at the time to be amazing possibilities. And being a bit of a loner, it was a great escape for me to get away from kind of being the odd kid out to living in my own little world. So after smoking that first joint, obviously, I got a bit of a knack for marijuana. And I continued smoking it till I was about 15, 16, somewhere around there, and by this time I'd become a real recluse, in a sense of just being consumed by myself and consumed by my own world and in my own little bubble, and really didn't have a good relationship with my father, who was so much older than what my mother was and than what I was, and we really just didn't see eye to eye. And I remember coming home from school one day, and him and I had a huge fight. And he ended up hitting me, and then I hit him, and it was at that point that I was kind of kicked out of the house. So at that time as well, I'd been working at a nightclub called Witbank, looking after pool tables on a Saturday. And having nowhere else to go, I went to Witbank and I let them know what my situation was, what my story was. And the owner, Basil, at that time said to me, no, that I could move into one of the rooms and I could earn my stay by looking after the pool tables. And that's how that whole part of my life known me. So once I started staying there and looking after the pool tables, it was about a year later, and working just on a Saturday had now progressed to working a Wednesday through to a Saturday, and living at a nightclub, you kind of now start getting involved in what's happening in the nightclub scene, and I started filling in a spot here and a spot too, and in different little areas around the club. But it was a big mega club, and there were many different dance floors, and one Wednesday night, one of the DJs never rocked up for work, and the owner came to me and he asked me if I would like to DJ that night. Now at that time, DJs didn't really buy all their own music. The club kind of bought all their music, and we would just play their music. So of course I jumped at the chance. It was, in those days, DJs were gods, in a sense. So I jumped at the chance, and I started DJing, and now becoming a DJ, my status in life suddenly changed dramatically. I suddenly went from just a guy who ran the pool tables, and people would kind of speak to me to maybe get a free game of pool, but it was just all the geeky, dorky guys that hung around the pool tables, and now all of a sudden I'm being approached by all the girls that you would see in the club on a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday night, suddenly coming to me and speaking to me and showing interest in me. And this was just amazing in my world. Coming from the background that I did to suddenly being the center of attention, it was just, it was a fantasy. And of course now, by this time, I'd started hearing about other drugs that were available and started making friends with other DJs and other people in the same kind of positions. And a friend of mine, Pierre, mentioned to me that he was doing some acid. So I said, wow, I'd love to. So one Sunday morning, after an evening out of DJing all night, we went to a place called Emmarentia Dam, and that was where I took my first trip. And if I thought marijuana blew my mind, oh my goodness, acid was just a whole new level. I'd seen things I'd never seen before. It was completely and utterly different. I felt power like I'd never felt before, a sense of, it's just something you can't explain. It's mind-shattering. So that was just unbelievable. And so I found this knack for taking marijuana. I started finding this knack for taking acid. And by this time now, it was DJing on a Wednesday, a Thursday, a Friday night, and on a Saturday night. But a Saturday night, my friend Pierre, he played at a nightclub called Idols, and Idols was a very underground nightclub, and we would only go to that club at 2 o'clock in the morning when Pierre's set started. And by that time, when we got there, I mean, we were just baked. We were taking so many different concoctions and cocktails of drugs. And that just led into more things. Now when you're in the underground world like that, suddenly cocaine starts coming onto the scene, and poppers, and just a whole new mix. And of course, being at the level of social perception that we're in, you've got to kind of be the trendsetter. You can't just be somebody sitting in the background. So when new drugs were involved, of course, we always had to take them. And to be honest, I loved it. I loved taking drugs. I enjoyed the feeling that it gave me. I never felt the insecurity that I felt when I was sober. So it was great fun. And this really carried on until I was about 35. And many clubs and many different types of drugs and many different experiences. And out of all of them, I can't really say I had more than 2 bad experiences. And I know friends that have had really, really bad trips, and I've had friends kill themselves. And I was just one of the lucky ones. I don't know what it was, but I just loved taking drugs. But I eventually got to a point where I had a really bad breakup with a girlfriend. And she wanted to give it up, I wanted to give it up, and she didn't want to give it up. She wanted to just carry on with this party. You know, what would happen is everybody would come back to our house afterwards, and the party was at our place, so it was just this continual thing, and it was from a Friday to a Sunday night, non-stop, and she just loved the attention, and I've had this attention literally my whole life, and it was just getting too much for me. I could realize waking up in the morning that it's taking longer and longer for me to come right, and to wake up from the bubby, and you're almost waking up looking for a line of cocaine because your body is just so tired from the night before that you just need that. So because she wanted to carry on and I wanted to stop, it landed up that we broke up, and she got the house with all the friends and all the music and everything else like that, and I moved into this tiny little place in Belteford Park, and it was just me and my little dog, and I went through a terrible time there. I had no friends, although I had hundreds of friends. I had nobody to count on. I had nobody to turn to. My mother was in George. My whole family was in Knysna area, and it was just me, and I had no friends to turn to at that time. And I honestly got to a point in my life where I realized that this isn't worth being around anymore. It's not worth the effort of what I'm feeling compared to what I'd been going through. I just spent 20 odd years of my life being the center of attention, having almost an everyday out of body experience that was just mind blowing, and really you see things that you would not normally otherwise see. So it was just, and now all of a sudden that's ended. And it just eventually became too much. And I tried to take my life. I got to that point where it just wasn't worth living anymore. And when I did that, somewhere during the course of the night, I phoned my ex-girlfriend and I said to her, please look after Hash. Now, Hash was our dog that I was talking about. And I don't remember making the call, but that's what she said I did. And the next thing I remember is waking up and I'm in the bathtub and there's a shower of water being poured all over me. And it's her and my best friend at the time standing over me with a shower head spraying me wet, trying to wake me up from what I'd just done. And at that moment of waking up, the realization of realizing what it is that I've just done, the shame was just, whoa, it was big. If I thought I wanted to kill myself before, my goodness, what I felt like afterwards was even more. And now they're standing there and they're telling me, come on, Guy, get up. What are you doing? Have a line. And I know I don't want a line. And they say, no, it'll snap you out. And I just didn't know what to do. And I had a friend that I'd met here in Witbank. His name was Paul. And he owned a nightclub here in Witbank, and he just came to my mind, and I phoned him and I explained to him what I had just done. And he got in his bakkie and he drove from Witbank all the way through to Joburg. And he put all my stuff, everything that we could fit into the bakkie, we put into the bakkie. And we drove to Witbank, and that was, I think, about 15 years ago now. And thank goodness to Paul, because he really saved my life that day. I think had he not come that day, I definitely would have been more successful at my attempt, because now I had even a greater reason to want to take my life because of the shame. I could never set my face around all these people again, and you know, in my mind, being this personality, to have done what I did, there's no way I could show my face around all these people again. It was just too embarrassing for me. And that's where Paul saved my life, because he came and picked me up and he took me out of that situation, and he broke that. And he brought me here to Witbank, and not to say that it was any better in Witbank. He owned a nightclub, and you know, I had to try and earn some kind of keep in that, so I started working at the nightclub, and eventually I bought shares at the nightclub, and it just went back to the same old where it was, taking drugs and having fun, and suddenly being the house where everybody would come back to. And so I started feeling a lot more like my old self, but deep down I knew that this isn't where I wanted to be. You know, I'm getting old. I've got to do something with my life. You know, I've got nothing to show for it. I've got no security and nothing. It's kind of just a lie. And then I met Nikki. And Nikki was a bit of a godsend, I believe, today. And then I didn't know it. I thought she was an arrogant, I won't say the word. Just the way she introduced herself to me and everything else like that, I was just like, wow, that's so boisterous. It's just like, who do you think you are? Do you know who I am? Type of attitude. And it turned out that she lived upstairs from where I lived. So we were in the same complex. And she lived upstairs, I stayed downstairs. And anyway, I came home one night and I was totally baked and went out into my garden. I started screaming. I think I was calling out Natalie or something strange. I can't even remember. And her name's Nikki. And so, but eventually she came out and she was wearing this perfect little hot number and she was looking gorgeous. And we started seeing each other and that. And she's a Christian and she believed in God. And we'd argue. We would argue all the time about God. I would say there's just no way that God can possibly exist to allow such craziness to go on in the world. How can he possibly exist? And I used to tell her, you know, that the Bible is just a story tale. It's like something that's been passed down generation to generation. And she would laugh at me. But anyway, we carried on seeing each other, and every night she would tickle my back and tickle my head. And I just thought I was being spoilt. I thought I was just so lucky and that. But she was actually praying over my body. And she would pray over my mind, and then she would pray over my body, and she would tickle me while she was doing that. And I never knew anything about that. And in this time, we'd met some new friends, Craig and Robert. And Craig wanted to become a Freemason, so he asked me to join him. And I said, yeah, I'd love to become a Freemason. And we went off to the hall one day, and we went for our first meeting. And by this time, Nikki is completely freaking out because she knows something about the Freemasons, and she's phoning her dad, and they've got this whole prayer group going for us. And I think it was the next day that we actually heard about this Angus Buckham's men's camps. So we said, oh, let's go down there. And we went down there, and I gave my heart to God. And it was just great. It really was. And I phoned Nikki and I said, no, things need to change and everything else like that. And so I came back to Witbank, and I knew that there was something that had to happen. And Craig kept saying to me, and Nikki kept asking me to come to New Life Church because there was this place that they had found, and it was a fantastic place. But I didn't want to know anything about it, although, again, I knew in my heart that there was something that needed to happen. So eventually Craig and Susan were getting baptized, and Craig asked me to come to his baptism, so I said, okay, fine. And I came to New Life Church, and I sat in the hall, and when Andrew started speaking, it was like I was the only person in that hall. And although I'd given my heart to God at Angus's camp, it wasn't a serious give. It was more of an emotional give because of, there was 35,000 men and everybody singing and the mana, and so I think it was a really emotional tug, almost emotional blackmail, if I can call it like that. But it wasn't something that came from me. It was something that I was influenced by, and it was just, everybody was like, oh, congratulations, well done, you made the right choice, and it was just, yeah, great. But it was that day that I came to New Life Church, and Andrew spoke that I knew, and God spoke to me that day, and he just told me about his love and how much he loves me and how much he wants me back in his family, and I just couldn't believe it. That somebody like me that had gone through everything that I'd gone through, that had done all the things that I'd done, and really I can't say everything that I'd done on camera, but I did some pretty horrific things. I had some great times, and I'm surprised that nobody ever died, and I never caused a serious accident that caused somebody to die. So that was very surprising for me, that God would want somebody like me to be a part of his work, if that makes any sense. So I went home and I told Nikki about what had happened to me in church, and she was just so excited. And so eventually I started coming to church on a regular basis, but it was never a full surrender, because the whole faith aspect, it's not always that easy to just give up what you know and touch and feel and you can smell and see, to suddenly believe in something that's written in a book, and you've got to have this faith. And so it was very hard for me to just jump on board 100% and be in there. And the more I came to church, the more I started saying, okay, cool, yeah, okay, I started believing in God. I mean, I never even raised my hands in worship, whereas now you can't get my hands down type of thing. But it was always a struggle because I was fighting with my flesh part of myself, saying, oh, this is just a fable. And because of that, I think that the bad nature that I had with me was still very, very strong, that I still continued to do a lot of the things that were bad in the background, but still living this life of saying, no, I'm converted and I'm a great Christian now, and I go to church, and God will save you, and carrying on. And so anyway, I had a company with Paul called 4F Concepts, and I took some money from the company, and I got caught, and again, all the shame that came along with that and everything else like that. But the amazing thing was the church was the one that was there for me. The friends that I had that had supported me through that, taking the money, the ones that had actually gone out for a drink with me and knew exactly what was happening, suddenly became the ones pointing a finger at me, saying, oh, you're the Christian, and this is 10 Commandment stuff, and you shouldn't be doing this. And so it was very hard, but then the church was supportive. And Andrew phoned me and he said, I've heard what happened, can I come and see you? And he came and saw me, and he sat with me, and we spoke about it, and that's when I realized the heart of the church. And that was really when it dawned on me, God's grace for me. No matter what I do, no matter how I act, no matter how I choose to respond to certain things, God's love for me is greater than anything that I could ever imagine. And to try and sit and live in a life where I can put that into perspective, it's like taking an acid. You don't believe what you're seeing. But now I don't believe what I'm hearing, because it just doesn't make sense. And now it's a point where I spend time with God, and I get into God's Word, and I really get to learn about who it is that God says I am. And who God says I am is something completely different to what I feel and believe that I am. I'm far more than what I think I am, feel that I am. He's just so in love with me. It's crazy. I can only put it down to how much I love my children. It's a love that I have for them that is, I will step in front of a bullet for them. End of story. But God put His Son in front of a bullet for me, and I would never put my daughters in front of a bullet for somebody else. So it's just crazy to me. It's that God's love is crazy for me, but it's awesome. And here I am today, after all this crazy journey, that I work for the church now. They hired me as their creative leader, which was very surprising, but so thankful, because as hard as the work is, there's nothing more rewarding than knowing that the little bit that I do has such an impact on increasing God's kingdom and increasing His territory. And the little bit that I do has influence in so many people's lives. And that's just amazing that I can be a part of that, and I can be a part of the work for the biggest boss in the entire world. You know what I mean? And this boss, it's almost like there's nothing that you can ever do that'll disappoint him. Ever. Ever. He will always love you. He will always stand there with open arms, wanting you to come back. And you just got to swallow the pride and turn to Him and look at Him and just say, God, without you, I'm nothing. But with you, I'm everything. I have all the strength. I have all the character. So turn to God. If you're looking at this and you're wondering how to get out of a pit and you're wondering how to get away from that lust for a feeling, or that lust for a woman, or pornography or drugs, whatever it may be, you're not going to do it on your own. I promise you. I know. But God is so strong that you won't even realize that you've done it once you've done it. Because God will pull you through, and you'll come out on the other end and be like, what just happened? So really, I encourage you to turn to God. He's truly amazing. So yeah, my name's Guy, and I'm a recovering drug addict.